This is Gail Malloy, Marcia Supera, Michelle Kaplowitz, and Heidi King, and soon Marcia Supera will be here. We were all had the great privilege to be at Sai Baba's in early 1970s when there were very, very few foreigners there, and Swami graced us with his love and his attention and his teaching, and he brought all of us to some great, beautiful places, and of which we'll talk about. And one of the greatest experiences we had was being able to follow Swami in cars. There was a stage where I think we all just looked at him as the divine Lord and Krishna, and we felt that we were his Gopis, following him wherever we could, whenever we could. And he reciprocated with lots of grace and divine love. Yes.
He did. He certainly did.
How did we wind up following him in cars? Because we certainly didn't from the beginning, because we wanted to.
Well, none of us had any money was really an important issue there. So just the fact that a car would ever materialize for us, and because we didn't have money in those days, we had to be very clever and really know how to survive and find what we needed. And I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure the opportunity to follow Swami in cars came from Michelle somehow, because she's totally observant and could figure out things, and she figured out that Swami would leave, and then there would be certain people who were actually invited, unlike us, to go along. And Michelle was kind of a crossover, because she was involved with two groups. She came with, who was it, Islams and Jai Devi?
Well, we got to be in that group when Hislop and the Howard Murphy and his wife and the Cowans and Mrs. Rajagopal and Jai Devi and I got actually to sit in Swami's house for 18 days from 9 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night.
So Michelle became friendly with those who were then what we would call the VIPs. There was very few of them in those days, and she became friendly with them. So, and they just loved her also, so they let her they didn't let her know but if we would watch very carefully, and if Mrs. Rajagopal.
I think it was intuition. You could just look around. We were so tuned into Swami, and we were so, you could see signs that he was going somewhere. You could see, once he was going to Shivaratri, he was not going to have Shivaratri. He said, I'm not having Shivaratri, I'm going away. I made up my mind, I'm not going. Swami's going to the jungle. He doesn't want us to come. I won't go. And I sat there, and then suddenly I see boys running with suitcases and buses coming into the compound. And a lady comes over to me and says, I know where he's going, I know where he's going. And it was like, I could not help but know. And I ran down the road. I said, Howard, quick, get the taxis. I couldn't stand not going. Get the taxis, Howard. And I ran to tell you and to tell everybody that he's going, and we've got to go. And the next thing we knew, all the taxis arrived. And even one time, we followed Swami. Remember, my mother was there? And he went to speak in Bangalore City. And we were in the taxi. And I saw Roger Eddy get up from the podium. And I knew that Swami's going to leave soon. This is a sign. Swami's going to leave soon. It's a very big crowd. We better get up and get out quick to get into the taxi. We got out into the taxi. We lost Swami's car. Then we turned 3 corners, and there was Swami's car sitting, waiting for us. It wasn't like this. We felt this was his divine will. It was his game, his Leela, that he let us play with him and enjoy. And he went to Mrs. Sridharan's house for dinner, and Swami asked her to please invite us in for the dinner. And this was my mother's first visit to India, and he was so gracious. There must have been 8 people at the dinner, and us.
And it was so sweet. And the Sridharams, of course, they were just wonderful, because they just, it was just so elegant. It was like we really were invited guests. I mean, there was not even a blink, and never years after, they always just said, wasn't that a wonderful dinner we had with Swami? Because they knew how his will worked. One of the times, some of the times were just so spectacular, because we really never did know where Swami was going. And he would almost wait for us. And we would...
Well, why don't we, Heidi, you
tell. To Anantapur.
Tell the Anantapur.
Yeah, you overheard 2 of the ladies talking, saying that they weren't Swami had said no breakfast the next morning. So we were up at like 4 o'clock in the morning waiting
with him, with our little taxi. And our taxi, see, there were several levels of taxis in India in those days, and ours was there were very few cars in India. And there was the taxis that were really nice ambassadors from the West End. And we saw a picture, and Swami was in a little Fiat, for God's sakes, and was not, you could usually find him, and so there was the taxis were the ambassadors from the few Indians that went with him that had their own. And then there was the West End Hotel, which was then the only hotel in Bangalore that any adult Westerner
Swami
could
called
stay.
it Waste End.
Waste End. 'Cause it was so
Waste
expensive.
End Hotel.
But it had
But he actually went there once to see Walter and Elsie Cowan.
Oh. Yeah, it was just an incredible experience. But our taxi was, and how I really became involved with the Gopi Brigade so deeply is because I found the cheapest taxi in City Market, and the driver Narayana was just psychic. I mean, he could show up when Baba was leaving, just like everything else, but he never had gas, and that's one of the things I remember. Like Baba would be leaving, and there was never gas in his car because it was this little, and we always ended up going to wherever Baba was going, and the whole thing we would be praying for gas. Remember, we would be just praying for the gas
or a gas station.
And that morning we left for Shanti Nilayam.
No, we didn't ever have time to stop at a gas station. We would just pray that we could get there.
So talk about how when we went down the road, Swami started off down the road. There was a bullock cart overturned in the road, and Swami's car had to stop. And we got out and we walked over to Swami's car. Do you remember how Swami looked that morning?
Yeah. What I really remember is how he looked later. that was a darshan that really.
That darshan got me. He was like the sunrise. He was Brahma Murta. There was 1 second of complete silence and stillness in which he was the dawn. He was the dawn. And then he broke it and he said, no, don't come to Anantapur. I'm only going there for 2 hours. None of us. I'm only going for 2 hours. Why come there? He said, you go to Bangalore. All the cars pulled off. We even pulled off. It was Heidi and I and 3 Indian ladies in one taxi. We pulled off the road. We stopped. Heidi, you tell the conversation.
Yeah. Then it was, do we follow him when he's told us not to follow him, or do we go on to Bangalore? And this one Indian woman was saying, oh no, don't you know that story of Krishna when Krishna told the gopis to stay in their village and attend to their duties, and they all left their duties and they went out and followed Krishna anyway. And so she was very persuasive. I was still afraid, I must say.
Heidi was saying,
we should do what Swami said. We should do what Swami said.
And I sat in the middle knowing that it would be my vote that swayed it one way or the other.
Well, you were convinced.
And I said, no, I said in my heart, I said, Swami, if I'm doing the wrong thing, I guess I'll have to learn the hard way. But I just love you so much, and we won't even come inside, Swami. We'll just stay outside. We'll just stay outside. And our car pulled up to the outside, and we were true to our word. We stay outside, and then his beautiful figure walked out onto the outside balcony of Anantapur on the 2nd floor, and a hand waves like this. And we're like, and again the hand waves like this. I think on the 3rd wave we understood that we should come inside. And we came inside, and he was up on the top, and he was like Rama shooting arrows at us.
Oh.
And he said,
oh, he was like Krishna to me. Total yellow, glowing.
Yes.
I've never seen him glowing like that any other time.
We took that Ram bow from the Ram statue.
Bing! And he said, how did you know Swami's program?
Yes. That was from you overhearing the breakfast.
Yes.
No
How
breakfast.
did you know Swami's program? And then he said, oh, Pancha Pandavas. Heidi was Dharma Raja.
Yeah.
Dharma Raja.
Arjuna.
And Mrs. Rao and her
daughter.
daughter, Mrs. Rao was Bhima, because she was, and the other 2 ladies were Nakula and Sahadev. And we were so, Pancha Pandavas, Pancha Pandavas. 2 years later in Vrindavan, I'm sitting around a circle and I overhear 5 Delhi ladies talking. And these Delhi ladies are saying, oh, do you remember the time Swami called us the Pancha Pandavas? So Swami, he builds you up and then he also keeps you in a good place.
Yeah, he always does.
But on that trip then, from there back to Bangalore, do you remember we stopped at the road, on the side of the road, the Kumanis had to go and get petrol for their
We
for
had
their
Tiffin.
taxi.
Tiffin, where is
Tiffin
my
is
Tiffin?
A little later.
Wait, this is how we sat. Sit here for a second, Gail. This was so much fun. And Heidi we were all in the taxi.
This is us in this passenger taxi.
Jerry Duncan paid the taxi.
Driver.
We did, and Jerry paid the taxi, so she got the front seat, and the rest of us were in the back.
Oh, yes.
That was a fun.
Yes, it's fun.
But sometimes it actually would get us in trouble, like the time, this was a little later, and it was at the end of the time, but we were in Delhi, and we again, through all kinds of courses, found out Swami was leaving.
Buses.
We got all to Delhi, 36 hours. When we get to Delhi, we
I
find
flew.
where he is. What did you do? You flew. Well, you had more money somehow. How did you have money?
She always did.
Anyway, we took the 36-hour train, and the rest
Oh,
of
yeah,
us
it was
did. And it
horrible.
actually turned in, of course, to a 46 or 50-hour ride. But we did get there. We got out of the plane. And Delhi was on by the golf course road.
Right.
It was
Golf
just
Link Road.
and it was just beautiful darshan. I mean, even in Delhi in those days, except for the one where they went to the Kurukshetra battlefield, which was all the Sadhujis were there. It was so amazing because they're big people and they ran up to. There was no really big crowds even in Delhi. I don't even think 2,000
Oh, there
people.
was a lot of
there was
people
a
in
lot.
Delhi. Swami couldn't get out into the pandal because every time he started to walk out into the pandal,
72.
everybody
But it was so
stood
small
up. He
compared.
came up on the roof,
Yeah.
and he stood up on the roof, and the people shouted, Sai Baba Darshan Do, Sai Baba Darshan Do.
yes.
And Swami stood there and swayed like Shesha.
Yeah, but
and the
it-
crowd went wild.
Wow.
One man jumped a 6-foot wall. They actually pushed that wall down at the end of the stage. He jumped over the
He
wall,
couldn't
and
help
Swami
it.
called him for interview.
Those were the days. Nowadays, if you do that, you get tossed. But in those days, you could do those things that were approved. But I really remember the merit darshan because in South India, the people are small and they're really vegetarians and they're really tiny. In North India, the people are really big, and in those days, we were all really tiny, not unlike now. And we were all skinny. And I remember actually being knocked down in
we
the
were
merit.
volunteers then.
Yeah, but there was no volunteering against those people. They literally knocked us over. But in Delhi that time, we did get in trouble following Swami, and this was like the worst because we really didn't get bailed out of this very easily because Swami had an invitation to Indira Gandhi. So we had no idea. Don't you remember this?
I didn't get in that one. I was not in that
Oh,
one.
well, she had better intuition. Yes. We went right through the gate of the palace, and boy, Swami did invite us. And that time, we really got chewed. We had
Thank you,
no
Swami. Glad I listened to
idea. It was like, but they were very nice. They gave us tea, and they were much nicer than Swami was later.
That's only in India can you gate crash your Prime Minister's palace.
Well, we were with God. I mean, it was just the most amazing thing. So sometimes we got in a little trouble, but it was a really wonderful thing about, we were all very young and innocent then, so we really didn't have anything to gauge it
And
on.
there was nothing malicious.
There was nothing malicious, and there was no gauging
Swami
on
said
anything.
we were like brothers and sisters,
Yeah.
and there was so much devotion for Swami. He was Krishna. I mean, we got to live in an India that is ancient India, where all of our hearts were only seeing that he was God and in everything and everywhere, and especially in that form that gave delight and delighted all of our hearts and lit us up.
Yeah, and it was really, I felt, I mean, the one time, I mean, there were dozens of times that we just miraculously got to Sai Baba, but the one that was most important to me was the one when we were leaving, and Michelle found, when I was leaving India.
Madras.
In Madras. It was, oftentimes Swami would go to Madras around Christmas and sometimes in the summertime, and we would always welcome to follow. That was kind of public and known he was going to Madras, but you never really knew where he was going in Madras, and since it wasn't on the, and the Tamil language is very difficult for me, and I think for most people, there's like, not a word. I mean, I can't understand a word of Tamil, so we'd always get to India and get down to Madras, which was this whole different, very South Indian culture, and a very big city compared to what Bangalore was, and we would never know where Baba was. It was a big detective work, and I don't think a famous detective could have done better than Michelle, because she always
I don't know
found him.
how I knew that one.
No.
I think I had been to Madras once before, and been once before to this lady's house. And I don't know how. I don't know how.
We stayed at
Swami's
that hotel when
guidance.
we found out his whole program, and we had the coffee and the Christmas singing and
But that was
lots
a different
of
time.
grace.
That was a different time. This
Oh, that
was in
was-
June. This was in June because I came home in June. So it
And
had
this
to
is
go
when
in
this is
grade.
when this is when Walter Cowan died
Died.
in Madras.
And-
He and Swami, we managed to find the house where Swami was.
You managed.
You
Swami-
managed all on your
That was the
own.
day that he gave me this.
Right.
locket.
Swami walked out and he said, "Wait here. I am going to the hospital." And we waited, and Swami came back and he says, "Walter Cowan, complete dead. Doctors aren't letting me in." I'm saying, "What right for you? He's my devotee, my patient. No right for you." He says, "I went inside." He says, "I said, Cowan, Cowan." He says, Walter woke up, and Mrs. Cowan did complete hospital dance.
I love that.
And Mrs. Cowan did complete hospital
He did.
dance.
And he was
And
so sweet.
then he called us all in for private interviews.
Right.
And there were some people who were leaving the country, like Leela.
And me.
I
And
was
you.
leaving.
And Valerie.
And there were some
Same
people
as
who
us.
wanted to go north to Maharaji.
Right.
And he told me, "You don't go anywhere. You stay here and sing bhajans."